meeting of the Metropolitan Policy Council for Thursday, August 6, 2020 to order. And at this time, I'd like to call on Mr. Thompson to review who is present and from what jurisdictions, and then anyone else on the call that wants to, that you can identify.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I am simply going to read the names that I can see on my screen in the order that they are there. So that is pretty random. And then there are a few callers that I'll ask to identify themselves at the end. In addition to myself, I see Sid Schoaf from LCOG staff, Kelly Clark, LCOG staff, Drew Pfefferly, LCOG staff, Sasha Vartanian, Lane County staff, Neil Moyer, Metro TV. Commissioner, you are next, Commissioner Sorensen, Mayor Venice, AJ Jackson from LTD, Rachel Dorfman, LCOG staff, Tony Iacarino, who is the consultant who will be presenting agenda item 6C, Carl Ye from LTD. I see one labeled Rob, and I'm thinking that's probably Rob Interfeld. I see Ann Heath from the City of Coburg, Bill Johnson, ODOT, Andrew Martin, LTD, Dan Callister, LCOG, John Horvick, who is also a consultant who will be helping us with agenda item 6C, Tom Boyette, City of Springfield, Councilor Taylor, Eugene, Ellen Courier, LCOG, Emma Newen, Springfield, Matt Rodriguez, City of Eugene, Councilor Fury from Springfield, and Howard Schuessler from LCOG. And then I see a couple of phone callers who I can't identify, and if you would please identify yourselves.
I'm Franny Brindle.
Excuse me, I couldn't make those out.
I'm Sue Waller. I don't know that.
Neil Ladati from the City of Springfield.
Franny Brindle, ODOT.
I think that covers all the callers because one of them is me, one of them is Brenda, and then I heard Sue Walling, Neil Ladati, City of Springfield, and Franny Brindle from ODOT. So I believe that covers everybody on the screen, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Thompson, just let me know if we lose our quorum so we can suspend our meeting. If we
This conference will now be recorded.
So if we do lose our quorum, please let me know so we can suspend our meeting. In the meantime, I will now move to item number 3 on our revised agenda. I'll point out we revised the agenda yesterday to add the item 6, well, to rearrange items 6A, B, and C and add a new B. So with that in mind, I'd like to move to item number 3 and entertain a motion from an MPC member to approve the minutes of the July 9 MPC meeting.
I move we approve the minutes.
I second.
Okay, I heard a voice of Mr. Pictionary as the second, but I didn't recognize the taker.
Mayor Venice.
Mayor Lucy Venice of Eugene, thank you. Are there any comments, questions, or debate on the motion? Hearing none, we will go to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. And the motion is approved by voice vote. Okay, next up is item number 4, our adjustments to the agenda and any announcements from MPC members. Are there any MPC members first that want to make any adjustments to the agenda? Let's do the adjustments first. None? Okay, so let's entertain any announcements from MPC members. I see no one seeking recognition. So unless there is anyone seeking recognition, I would like to then move to number 5, which are comments from the audience. And there are a few people on the phone. Sounds like most of them are from agencies, but if anybody who's considered part of the audience wants to make a comment, please identify yourself. Okay, I don't hear of any comments from the audience. I'd like to now move to item number 6A, which is on our revised agenda, revisions to the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program Amendment Approval Authority. And the presenter is Dan Callister with LCOG, and please present, and then we will hold the public hearing.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is Dan Callister from LCOG. The item is proposed revision to Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program Amendment Approval Authority. We're requesting a public hearing regarding this. In a nutshell, what's being proposed is revising the MTIP document in order to allow MPO staff the authority to approve certain changes to project details from the MTIP. The reason we're proposing this, well, I guess a little background. So under the current MTIP, it describes the approval authority as MPC has authority to approve all project changes. They delegate the authority for most of those types of changes to the Transportation Planning Committee. And that committee has been approving these for years. The problem is that it meets monthly, and especially in summer and construction season, there are a lot of changes that are pretty time sensitive that need to be reflected in the STIP and the TIP in order for contracts to be updated and for funds to be moved. So adding sometimes a month to that approval process just from the MPO's side before it goes to ODOT for their approvals can be detrimental to the timely delivery of some of these projects. So this is important because we're being, when I say we, the three TMAs in Oregon, the large MPOs being ourselves, Portland, and Salem Kaiser, are under heightened scrutiny right now by ODOT for ensuring that we're delivering projects on the time frame that we're programming them. So projects that have funds that we've programmed to be obligated in federal fiscal year 2020 might be slipped, which means pushed back a year to 2021. That's problematic for ODOT, who has to maintain fiscal constraint within the STIP, and those funds need to be reflected somewhere. They've been making up for it, and they're losing their ability to do that more and more as we're getting worse and worse at delivering projects on time for a number of reasons, and not all of them are necessarily our fault. But the idea behind this is whatever we can do from the MPO side to streamline the process, to improve turnaround times so that we're not pushing projects back, can help us with that. Part of that heightened scrutiny is it may be coming with some penalties. If we're not delivering projects on time to a certain degree, we may lose some funding. So it's really in our best interest to do what we can to streamline processes, to program more realistically, and there are a number of other strategies. But this seems to be low-hanging fruit if we're looking at cutting some slack here and making things a little more efficient. So what's proposed is some of those changes, some of those certain types of changes that right now MPC has delegated authority to TPC. We're suggesting that MPO staff can approve those after concurring with the affected agencies to make sure that they're on board with that change. So in the cover memo on the second page, there is a table that shows what types of changes the MPO staff would be, under this proposal, would be able to approve. Well, the table really shows what they wouldn't be able to approve. It shows what MPC has approval authority over and what TPC would be delegated to. to approve under the proposal, and everything that's not there, we're saying MPO staff could just take care of. So the types of changes that the staff would be taking care of are the small, really common things like just pushing a project back or advancing, moving a project from a later year to a sooner year, or minor changes in costs, or it's really the small changes that we don't want to sit around and wait a month for TBC to get together to approve. We want to be able to just make sure the agency's on board, MPO approves it and sends it back to ODOT, and things get moving. So that would require a revision to the MTIP document, which is why we're holding a public hearing, or at least requesting one, and a 30-day public comment period. And we would ask for action to be taken in September MPC.
Okay, is there anything further you want to add to your report before we hold the public hearing? That's what we're going to do, right? We're going to hold the public hearing and then in September take action. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so at this time, I'd like to invite anyone present to identify themselves if they want to testify at the public hearing. Do I hear of anyone? I do not hear of anyone. So at this time, I'm going to open and close the public hearing on this topic. Is there anything further that we need to do on this?
Commissioner, I would just ask if there's any other questions or discussion from the MPC members.
Good point. I'm not as experienced. I've only done this for 1 year before today. Are there any MPC members' questions? Okay, hearing none, I think we're done with this agenda item. Is that correct, Mr. Thompson?
Yes, that will take care of that for this month. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll now move on to, and we'll revisit that next month. So at this time, we're now going to item 6B. This is the item that we added yesterday, the Federal Performance Measures Process Agreement. The staff is requesting that we agree to the ODOT coordination process with MPO with all MPOs in Oregon in setting, monitoring, and reporting state performance measure targets. I'll call on Mr. Thompson to make any presentation needed here.
Commissioner, I'm happy to make the presentation, and we were actually looking for an action on this, but I do note that Councilor Taylor just left the meeting, which unfortunately means we do not have a quorum. There are only 4 MPC members that I see in the meeting at this point, and we need a minimum of 5.
I thought Mayor Venice was on the phone.
Correct, but we still only have a total of 4. Yourself, Commissioner Sorensen, Mayor Venice, Carl Ye, and Councilor Piscinari. And unless I am missing somebody, those are the only 4 members.
So it's not the member jurisdictions, it's the appointed members, individual members.
Let me just call Betty and find out if she's coming back on.
Okay.
Commissioner Sorensen, the quorum requirement is a simple majority, which means at least 5 of the 10 members, plus at least 1 from Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County. So we are short of the majority by 1 member.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let's just stand aside.
Paul, ODOT doesn't count as a member then.
I am sorry, Franny, I forgot you're on the phone.
That's because all you see is my number.
You are correct, Franny. Sorry, Commissioner, we still have a quorum. When Franny Grendel from ODOT joined us, that actually bumped us up to 6. And so now we're at 5 members with Councilor Taylor having left. So we do still have a quorum. And again, my apologies, Franny.
And is Mayor Venice back on? Because she left to call.
She is with us, and she just held up a finger indicating, hold on a minute, I believe.
Okay, good. All right. So let's just stand, what is it called? Let's just stand while we pause momentarily for Mayor Venus to rejoin the meeting.
Can I ask a question from
Sure.
Coburg?
Sure.
Paul, the mayor is not able to attend today, but so I just need clarification. Am I counted as part of that quorum, or does the mayor have to be present?
Each jurisdiction and is allowed to have its MPC member and a designated alternate. If the mayor designated you as the voting alternate in his absence, then yes, you would count as a member for the purposes of this meeting.
Okay, is that, I just need to make sure I understand. So is that designation a formal designation, or is it designation for each meeting?
We have been somewhat relaxed in that. I would have to bring the bylaws up real quick to look, and I can do that. To be honest, I believe that it could be designated on a per meeting basis.
Okay, well, you don't have to answer it today. I just want to make sure I'm clear on it. So it doesn't happen to happen today. If you have a quorum, there's no point in spending time on it today. But I would like clarification on that.
Can I just jump in here? Betty was not, even though she was connected, she's not able to adjust her volume, so she wasn't able to hear the conversation. She's been trying to call in and she hasn't been able to call in. I don't know if someone from LCOG can help her access the meeting.
Without stepping away, I would have trouble doing so unless one of the other LCOG staff online can help with that on the side. But Commissioner Sorensen, I will say that again, with you, Mayor Venus Carlier, Councilor Piscineri, and Franny, who I'm sorry, again, I overlooked, we do have a quorum, so we can continue with this.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Well, very good.
All right,
Then we will now resume our meeting. I believe I was in the middle of discussing the agenda item where item 6B, and I was calling on Mr. Thompson, and so let's resume at that point.
So thank you, Commissioner. 6B is indeed the item that we added just this week after the first agenda went out. I emailed materials for this. It was a request on Monday from the Oregon Department of Transportation for you as the MPO Policy Board to agree to the coordination process document, which is a process document detailing how ODOT and the Oregon MPOs and indeed the public transit providers in the state will coordinate in setting the state performance measure targets, which are really then used in almost all cases as our federal performance measure targets for the MPOs. As my cover memo that I sent out described, we have been doing this for many years. We've had a process agreement in place, less formally, for several years now, as we have had joint performance measures with ODOT and the MPOs. What was sent out to you was version 4 of an updated draft of the process agreement. Typically, since it is a process and protocol agreement, we would have staff between the agencies agreeing to these things. This time around, however, Federal Highways Administration has asked that the policy boards agree to the process agreement. And obviously, having this request come on Monday, I was not able to take it to your advisory committee, but I can assure you that we have been a part of reviewing this and are entirely comfortable in recommending, I am entirely comfortable in recommending that you agree to the process document.
Okay, and what additional report is there on this topic?
There is no other additional report. I did not know if Eric Havig from ODOT would be on the phone by this point. He is going to be joining us shortly, but I don't believe he's joined us yet. He is one of the 2 ODOT staff who has been working on this and sent the draft process document out. So again, I'm happy to answer questions. I sent out a cover memo. I sent out the proposed process document. This is fairly straightforward in that, again, it doesn't involve a policy decision or anything else by you other than agreeing that we will adhere to this coordination process with the state DOT.
Okay, do you want to have a motion to agree?
That is what we are looking for, Commissioner. Yes, Commissioner, that is what we are looking for.
Yeah, he can't
Okay,
see you.
who wants to make comments here
I
or
do
a
have a
motion
question.
or a question? You know, I hear Mayor Venus and Councilor Visionary. Mayor Venus first.
Thank you. I just, I mean, this seems like a sensible thing, so I don't have any, I support this and I don't have any objections to it at all. I just, sort of a question that we ended our last MPC meeting kind of talking about evaluating our actions with respect to climate change and to what extent we kind of use that as a filter when looking at the work we do and keeping that framework alive. So I know that, I mean, other than air quality, I don't know that these performance measures sort of specifically call that out, but I just wonder if at some point there's a way in which we have our own performance measures that really do look at greenhouse gas emissions or walkability or other factors that we might want to going forward, separate from this standardized process.
Mr. Thompson,
Commissioner, if I may respond.
do you want to address that? And then before you do, I'd just like to make sure who else wants to recognize here after Mr. Thompson answers the question. Joe, are you asking?
No, I was just trying to point out that I think you can't see Mayor Venus and that she was waving her hands. I was trying to get your attention to help her. So,
Yep, true enough. Please help me in the future.
oh, and if you at the top of your screen, you should say where it says a view. If you drop that down, it says live cameras. That should help you.
Okay, live cameras. I'm currently viewing everyone, not everyone who's talking. Is that
just
correct?
Just drop down to live cameras and you'll see whoever is just actually on the camera.
Okay, live cameras as opposed to active cameras?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, active cameras.
Okay,
Mr. Chair,
yeah,
this is Eric Hovig. I am with ODOT. I am able to join the call. Paul wasn't sure I'd be on yet, but I am here. So if there are any questions for ODOT, I want to let you know I'm on the phone.
Okay.
I don't have a video link to join your meeting video though, so it's just phone only for me.
All right. Well, let's go back then to Mr. Thompson, and I appreciate anyone helping with who's trying to get recognized, because what I see on my screen, even though it says view everyone, is Mr. Thompson. So at this point, I'll go back to Mr. Thompson, and then if anyone else wants to seek recognition, they can let Mr. Thompson know. So
Thank
go
you,
ahead.
Commissioner. So thank you, Commissioner, and Eric, thank you for joining us, and please feel free to weigh in on this. In response to the comments and questions from Mayor Venus, this agreement is around working in coordination with ODOT on the required federal performance measures that the state and the MPOs have adopted and will continue to update and revise. As the cover memo reminds you, MPC has already agreed to support the state performance measures in all of these federal required measures. And you are correct in that there is not one that specifically addresses greenhouse gas emissions among these. There is no federally required performance measure around greenhouse gases at this time. But Mayor Venus, you are also correct that the MPO can choose to adopt additional performance measures beyond the federally required ones. Those are ones that we wouldn't necessarily report to the federal government on, because part of these federally required measures are, part of the process around those is that we do report on those to the state DOT and to the federal officials. Mayor Venus, we will be bringing at the September meeting a staff response around the recent public comments on the MPO and greenhouse gas emissions. And we also are in the process of updating of the MPO's regional transportation plan, the long range plan. And as part of agenda items that will be coming to you over the next several months in quick succession, we will be talking about goals, objectives, performance measures, and other things in the long-range plan that certainly would be appropriate places for you to consider including measures or other language around greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, anything further from anyone that wants to seek recognition? Okay, do you want to move on, Mr. Thompson, to item C, or do you want to get the action requested?
Commissioner, I would like to have the action on item B, which is a motion to agree to the ODOT coordination process document.
Okay, is there a motion to do that?
Hi, this is Carl Ye with LTD. So moved.
And Mayor Venus, I second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Ye and seconded by Mayor Venus to agree to the ODOT coordination process. Is there further discussion from MPC members? Further comments from staff? Further comments from anybody who I might have overlooked because I can only see 2 people on my screen?
Commissioner, I do not see anybody else raising their hand. I believe we are done with comments.
Okay. At this point, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. Motion carries by a voice vote. Okay, we can move now to item 6C. That is on our revised agenda, Oregon Transportation Commission 24-27 STIP funding allocations. I'll call on Mr. Thompson to introduce our presenter.
Thank you, Commissioner. This presentation will be presented by Eric Havik from ODOT, who was speaking just a few moments ago. However, we might have a slight hang up here. I need to confirm that, Eric, did you just say that you cannot present your slideshow on your end?
That's correct. I looking through all the stuff I got from you, Paul, I don't see a link to your video. All I had was a link to the webcast, or not the webcast, but and that didn't work. It was blocked by my browser. So all I'm on is on the phone.
Okay, and I'm sorry for that. We had expected you to be the presenter in this case. So Commissioner, if you can bear with me for a second, I am trying to bring up the presentation that Eric sent to me so that I can essentially run the slideshow for him.
Okay, that sounds like a good alternative.
And
thank you for your
that,
understanding and patience.
Yes, we're all still struggling sometimes, although it's getting more and more to be normal to operate like this. Eric, I don't know if you have anything you can start with.
Yeah, I can go and just kind of set a little bit of a stage for this, and then once you have it up, Paul, let me know, and I'll let you know what slide number, and I'll be tracking on my screen, so hopefully we'll be matching screens that way. Mr. Chair and members of the policy board, again, thank you for having me on short notice. For the record, my name is Eric Havik. I am the statewide policy and planning manager for the Oregon Department of Transportation. And in my role, I work very closely with our NPO partners, but a lot of our modal advisory committees and others in helping to prepare each version of our statewide transportation improvement program. And the reason I'm here in front of you today is to kind of share with you where we're at in developing the 2024 to 2027 statewide transportation improvement program. It's a really interesting time here at ODOT because right now we have 3 active STIPs that we are in some form working on. We have the current STIP, which is the 18 through 21, which projects are being implemented through. The commission last month in July just approved the 21-24 STIP, but we're still waiting for federal highway and FTA concurrence, which will get that, I believe, in September. And then that will become the current STIP. And believe it or not, we are beginning the conversations about what is our funding and funding priorities and how to build the 2024 to 2027 statewide transportation improvement program. The commission is really wanting to have a really good engagement with our area commissions on transportation, our MPOs, our tribal government, as well as our modal advisory committees to help understand the different and difficult choices that I think the commission is going to have in building this STIP. And that's what this presentation is really about, is to give you the same information that has been in front of the Transportation Commission. And then there's a few key questions at the end of this that I'd like to leave with you so you can start to think about any advice or guidance or input that the MPO might want to make to the Transportation Commission to help inform their work moving forward. So Paul, do you have the presentation up?
The presentation's on my screen, and I believe I shared it. Members, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, Eric, I believe we're good to go, and I'm on the title slide.
All right, let's go down to the next slide. It should say OTC investment strategy. So I'm going to set a little bit of the stage before I jump right into the heart of this presentation, which is really about building the 24-27 STIP. The Transportation Commission is going through a lot of information gathering and discussions to help inform where they need to invest in the transportation system as part of this next STIP. And to help inform that, we began at the very beginning of 2020 working with the Commission to update an investment strategy. And some of you may recall that back in 2016, the Transportation Commission developed an investment strategy that really helped inform House Bill 2017, where we got very significant transportation investments statewide from the legislature through that measure. But we really haven't looked to see what was the effect that House bill has had on our investment strategy, and that's what this version was supposed to do. We were getting into the process, and then COVID hit us, and we've now kind of modified with the Transportation Commission our intent of the investment strategy. So the investment strategy now is all about trying to talk about where did House Bill 2017 get us, and what is the gap that we still have in transportation funding and needs moving forward. So Paul, let's move to the next slide. So this version of the transportation strategy, which I'd really call maybe a part one, is really going to lay out the investment strategies across all of our different programs, looking at all the different modes and the kind of investments we need to be making in the transportation system, and will hopefully become a framework and a baseline for the conversations in front of the Commission, which is why I want to run through some of the key findings with you so you also have that same information that the OTC does. Next slide, Paul. So jumping to the conclusions of the strategy before I jump into some of the details, even though we got significant investment out of House Bill 2017, if you go back to the investment strategy that the OTC prepared in 2016, we laid out 4 different levels of funding, and then we described what those benefits and what we could achieve and accomplish if the legislature came through with those different levels of funding. What we ended up really getting out of House Bill 2017, even though it was significant, is we got to level about 0.5 of the first level. So it really didn't even get us to level 1 that we were kind of talking about in that strategic plan or in that investment strategy. So that means while we got a lot of money, things can really be better across a lot of different modes in the system, we're still going to be looking at some serious and difficult trade-off conversations that the Commission is going to have. There's not going to be enough money to fully fund all of the different kind of programs and projects and investments that we know we need to make in the transportation system. Next slide. A little bit of a picture. Many of you that have been around the MPO for a while, you've probably seen versions of this slide. I think we've been calling this the mountain chart. Really, the big thing here to kind of look at is while we have some good investments that we've had over time, and we've kind of built up that revenue opportunities. We're really kind of reaching our peak right about now into 2021, and we're going to start to see a decline in money available and funding available for transportation. A lot of this is back into the OTIA increments, and we're now just really paying off the bonds from those programs. So that's now a debt service kind of situation. Jobs and Transportation Act that brought additional money. Now it's paying off the bonds for those projects. We had the early investment from a lot of those programs, and now we have the backside, which is the paying off of those bonds. So there's not new money coming in. Those are now just deficits in the ledger. In addition, as we look at the federal forecast and the state forecast for state gas tax, obviously with the COVID situation, we're looking at some reduction in federal and state funding available there. So that's what this graph is trying to show, is we're looking at a declining revenue projection scenario moving into the next step. Obviously, before we have any conversation around what our strategic investments, we got to understand where our policy framework is. We don't want to toss out all the good policy that we have from the highway plan, the Oregon Transportation Plan, and the guiding principles that we've really been bringing into our STIP development process for a number of cycles is based upon our major improvements hierarchy, where we are protecting our existing system, preserving and maintaining what we have. Then we look at improving efficiency. How can we make the system work as efficiently as possible as we can without adding capacity? Then we finally get to adding capacity and new facilities. So that is kind of our bedmark hierarchy of how we kind of think of investments in the system. So the investment strategy really starts to then look at what do we have for each of our program areas and modal areas. So when we're talking about preservation of the system, we're talking pavement preservation. ODOT has already moved towards a fix-it priority set of corridors. You can see those on this slide in blue. And we don't have enough money to even maintain and preserve those facilities at the level we want to, let alone all of the other facilities we have within the state. And there's many, many important routes to different communities, whether it's farm to market, major routes, other principal arterials. Try to have enough money to even preserve the kind of this principal network that you see in blue is going to be challenging enough as far as preserving our system to the level and condition of assets that we want to achieve. On the bridge side, you may have heard this as well from the Transportation Commission. We got great investments from OTIA as well as from Jobs and Transportation Act, and even with the House Bill 2017. But we're basically, with the amount of money we have available, if we can continue with the funding levels we've seen in the STIP, we are on a 900-year replacement cycle, and I think it's actually gone up to closer to 1,000, which means a bridge is only going to be replaced every 1,900 or 1,000 years. So that's really asking a lot of our bridges, and in order to make that, we're going to have to make sure we're doing a good job of preserving them and keeping the superstructure and the substructures in good condition. Pavement, we have at least a need of $100 million or more a year just to achieve a sustainable program. And then on the culvert side, the replacement cycle is even worse than bridges. It's a 1,300 year. And you can see on this slide a picture of one of our larger culverts. Not doing such a great job of passing water through the actual metal part of the culvert, which is going to eventually degrade the ground around, and you will end up with some sort of a washout or sinkhole, which we've seen during many of our storm events. On the safety front, obviously safety is a very important program for us. We have a number of fatal and serious injury crashes a year. The goal for ODOT and for the state of Oregon is to get to no deaths or life-changing injuries by 2035. And that means we need some substantive investments in the transportation system for safety. Active transportation, obviously, completing the system for walking and biking networks with the kind of money that we're able to put in the system routinely from the STIP. It's going to take us 164 years to complete the walking and biking network as it's envisioned from our active transportation needs inventory across the state. There's obviously a need for more money for active transportation infrastructure, just completing the network as well as safety.
Quick question.
Just a side note on the Safe Routes to School, you can see that the need there is about 5 times the available funds. Was there a question?
Quick question, please. Sorry. Just very quickly, what is a vulnerable user?
What is a vulnerable user? Typically, we refer to vulnerable users as those that are not in a protected state. So usually it's walking, biking, folks that are mobility challenged. When I talk about walking, that's also with wheelchairs or other walking or pedestrian type aids, scooters, skaters, all those kind of folks that don't have the protection of a vehicle around them. Even motorcycles are considered vulnerable users.
Okay.
From that kind of standpoint.
Thank you.
You bet. So Paul, moving to the next slide, we have public transportation. And what you can see here in this slide is you can see the level 1 baseline level of needs. There is that kind of chart. With the program that we got from House Bill 2016, the STIF program, it made a great dent in this, but we are looking at substantial needs on the public transportation side moving forward as well. There's a lot of unmet need to really get us to the level that we need to from that investment strategy. I believe the new version of the Oregon Public Transportation Plan essentially says that by 2030, and again, don't quote me on this, we will be at about the same level of performance we were prior to the House Bill 2017 dollars coming in. So again, with costs going up, you eventually lose ground on some of the gains that you make over time. Next slide, Paul. Because this is a comprehensive investment strategy, we also look at multimodal freight, recognizing that the Connect Oregon program is not funded out of the STIP. It is a dedicated program. The legislature provides funding for that. But this is an important part of our infrastructure. We have to have a well-connected and interconnected multimodal freight network in order to move the goods and services and products that are produced here in Oregon, as well as move those products and services that Oregonians need and utilize here within the state. One of the things that the Connect Oregon program has been a huge success for a number of years. From 2006 to 2017, we averaged $35 million a year from the legislature to fund that program. For the last number of years, it's been averaging more like 11 million. So right now, we have not had a competitive program since 2015. And it's not looking like we will have another competitive program for Connect Oregon until at least 2022 or even 2023 at the earliest. So there's a lot of pent-up demand and needs there on the multimodal freight system. Next page, Paul. When we're talking modernization, one of the key things we're talking about is probably highway modernization, but there is more to that than just highways. But one of the key themes that the Transportation Commission has identified is the growing congestion in the Portland area as well as other areas of the state. And how do we fund and how do we deal with that growing congestion problem? This is another area of need for additional transportation investment. One of the things we heard very clearly in House Bill 2017 from every corner of the state is that the Portland area congestion affects the economy of every corner of the state. It didn't matter if you were in Medford, Klamath Falls, Burns, Ontario. The people that were involved in helping to inform the legislature said, we are affected by that congestion, and here's how it affects us. So that's another growing area of need for funding as well. So that's really what's encapsulated into our investment strategy document, and this document is available on the OTC's website if anybody would like to go into a little bit more detail and read. I hit everything at a very high level, but really what we're trying to do is paint the picture that the needs are really growing, the system needs are growing, and unfortunately, revenue is not keeping pace. So setting the stage, now we need to move into what are we doing to develop the next step. So next slide, Paul. I'm going to do this very quickly. Hopefully everybody at the MPO understands this because you helped develop your Metropolitan Improvement Program. The STIP is just the statewide version of that. So this is our federal and state funds. It's the capital improvement program at the statewide level. It does not include maintaining and operating the system. It does not include many of our grant programs, or as well as our revenue producing programs like Department of Motor Vehicles and the collection of fuel tax from heavy haul carriers, motor carriers. Next slide. So we have essentially three STIP phases, and we start off with the funding allocation, then we move into project selection, and then finally public review and approval. We are at the very beginning there on the left side. We are at the funding allocation portion of the STIP development process, which is really what the questions we will have for you at the end of this presentation will be all about. Next slide, Paul. So in order for us to get to our funding allocation, we've begun the conversation with the Transportation Commission just last month, and they reaffirmed that they would like to hold on to the definitions and the categories of the different funding funding programs that we've had in the STIP for the last number of years. That's important because we have to have some sort of baseline to begin that conversation. And what we're moving into right now is we are trying to develop what kind of different funding scenarios should the OTC be considering to help inform and make their final decision, with that decision hopefully coming at their December meeting where they'll approve what the funding levels for the STIP will be. And when we're talking the funding allocation, this is not at the sub-program levels. This, again, is going to be at the fix-it program, safety, et cetera. And I think the next slide actually has that list. Perfect. So, Paul, if you go to the next slide.
Yep.
So the program funding categories, you can see those here. Hopefully this is not a surprise to most of you. We have our enhanced highway, our fix-it program, which is that's that preservation, but it has pretty much all of those preservation assets in there. Safety, our non-highway active transportation and transit support. Local program funding, we have a number of agreements where money is taken off the top for local programs, as well as then finally other functions. And there's a few programs in the STIP that cover those. To set a little bit of the stage for where we were at in the 21-24 STIP levels, you can see where the funding went to those. And you can also see the investments where House Bill 2017 made substantial improvements. So if you start on the left side on the highway enhanced, really the Transportation Commission in that darker blue segment did not allocate a lot of money to enhancing the highway system as part of the 21-24. The vast majority, and I'm not doing the math, it's probably well over 90% that is in the enhanced category is really from House Bill 2017 and the dedicated projects that measure called for funding. Safety, you can see a fairly robust level of investment from the Commission in safety, and House Bill 2017 added a little bit more. Non-highway, very similar levels as safety. I'm not going to talk a lot about the local programs. We can get to that if you have questions. And then you can see the majority of the money really from the Transportation Commission, where they have discretion, was put towards the Fix-It program. And then House Bill 2017 added some additional money to those programs. Next slide. So we are in the public and stakeholder engagement phase to help inform the conversation for the Transportation Commission. And again, they want to be starting to talk in September around what those different scenarios might look like, evaluate those scenarios, understand the trade-offs of different funding levels for different programs, with the goal of their meeting in December, selecting that funding allocation, because that will then set the program levels that we can move forward into project selection and scoping. So the folks we're talking with, advisory committees, MPOs, tribal governments, area commissions on transportation, that's who we're reaching out to right now. There is a survey on spending priorities. I believe Paul sent out a link to that as another message to your policy board. Paul, if there's any issues with that, let me know. We'll make sure we get another link to you. We'll also have an online webinar. In case you missed any of this presentation with me, you can get the same presentation on Monday. We're making that available just for those that were not able to attend these kind of meetings. And then we're going to be asking a few questions here at the end. Next slide. One thing I want to hit upon, I believe one of the board members talked about climate and emissions. One of the things that we know we're going to have to do with the governor's executive order is bring a climate lens to this development of the STIP moving forward. And so our climate office is already beginning to develop some tools and techniques to help inform that. And stage one is really where we're at right now, is how do we look at these program level decisions to understand what kind of an impact it may or may not have on climate and emissions. Stage two will help inform more of the selection of the projects for scoping, and then stage three will be an assessment of that actual draft and final STIP document. So climate is definitely going to be a lens that the department and the OTC has to use in helping to build this next version of the STIP. Next slide. The last thing I want to hit about information that the commission is using to help utilize in their decision making and in their thought process for this next version of the STIP is the commission also in July gavelled down on a set of what we're calling strategic action plan priorities. And they boiled these down to three specific action plan priorities. The first one is around equity and making sure that equity is included in our decision-making process, that we are including a diverse and equitable users of the system to help inform the choices and the investment strategies and the investment decisions and the project decisions that we make. We want to make sure we're investing in a modern transportation system. So how do we make sure we build, maintain, and operate that modern multimodal transportation system? Thinking of climate and helping communities and our economy thrive. And there's a number of sub-goals under these that I don't have time to get into, but are available as well on the OTC website. And then the final one is around sufficient and reliable funding. So the next slide, you can go there, will expand a little bit more on the modern transportation system goal areas. I didn't have time for some of the other areas, but we do for modern transportation, because this is really, I think, some of the principal guiding goals that the commission wants to consider as they help develop this next version of the STIP. So they have a goal area around preservation and stewardship. So preserving, maintaining, and operating the existing system. Safety of the system. How do we make sure we're making it safer for all users and helping to achieve our moving towards our goal of zero serious injury or fatal crashes by 2035. Accessibility, mobility, and climate change. So how do we make sure we're thinking of providing mobility options and travel options for all Oregonians, and how do those options help mitigate or address climate change? Congestion relief is another important area. How do we make sure we are investing in, as best we can, a comprehensive strategy for managing and relieving and reducing congestion in Portland, but also looking at reducing traffic congestion throughout Oregon and other areas. Project delivery, how do we make sure we're coming up with the right solutions? I would actually call this really planning and project delivery, because really the solutions are developed through the planning process. So how do we make sure we are addressing community needs, but also the needs of the system and all users, so we have a reliable and resilient transportation system. And then obviously using innovation. How can we use innovation and technology to help? Back to that slide that I had earlier from the OHP, you can see that this modern transportation system and the subset goals really align with what we have from our statewide policy plans already. Next slide. So all of that was really the precursor to set the stage to really bring these questions to you. These are also going to other committees, advisory committees, modal committees, et cetera. And you know, this conversation, Mr. Chair, I think it's fine if you want to have some of this open dialogue with the committee today. But what we're really looking for from these various committees is for you to engage in a dialogue and share that information for the commission prior to their September meeting. So, Paul, as staff for the MPC, we'd be looking for that kind of information in a letter form or some other form, probably towards the end of August or very early in September, so it can be provided to the Transportation Commission. So here's the four basic questions. What are the highest priority transportation needs for funding statewide, and how should the OTC allocate funding between modes of transportation and categories to meet the state's goals? Question 2, how should the OTC allocate funding among fix-it, safety, and highway enhanced programs to meet the statewide goals? So it's kind of a subset, maybe, or further refinement of the first question. The third question, how should the OTC target non-highway spending to address statewide goals? So again, breaking this down even a little bit further. And then finally, question number 4, which I think is really the heart and soul of this. Given that the transportation system needs exceed available funding, how would you recommend the OTC make these trade-offs in deciding how to allocate? We know we're not going to have enough money to do everything we want to do. So there's going to have to be trade-offs. So how does the commission evaluate and make those decisions? So that's really what this presentation was all about. The last slide is just the question slide, Paul. So you can probably just leave this one up for everybody to see. And I will open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you. And first, I'd like to remind whoever caller 14 is to mute your phone, because we are hearing bits of your phone call or background noise. So please, everybody check, make sure your phones are muted. And now I just want to thank our presenter. Thanks so much for the presentation. And I'd like to open it up for questions from MPC members. And Mr. Thompson, if you could help me identify who is seeking recognition, that'd be great.
Mayor Venus wants to.
Okay, Mayor Venus, why don't you ask the first question?
Followed by Carl.
Great, thank you so much. It was a very helpful presentation, and I'm just sort of spanning some questions, just struck by a couple of things, which is that it seems to me that you have a highway enhancement fund separate from looking at, the climate you have put into sort of a different category around active transportation. And so I just wonder, I'm understanding that the highway enhancement is a change, that it used to be an enhancement fund that allowed for non-highway solutions. So I'm just wondering, as we talk about climate change, whether there's some room to expand this and include non-highway things, especially for cities like ours, where active transportation or transit options might, be more appropriate response in terms of climate change. And also looking at congestion, thinking when you're looking at congestion in the Portland area, it seems like, again, are we talking about big highway improvements, or is this a time to actually look at transit options as congestion? It feels to me a little outdated to say I don't know what the congestion proposals are on the highways, but it feels again like it's in terms of the governor's requirement and calling on the state agencies to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. It feels like that is factored into all categories. There's sort of put it into one section. So just, looking, I guess that would be my first take on this, is it doesn't seem to incorporate the greenhouse gas reduction sort of across the board and look at it up to a wider range of strategies within those categories.
Mayor Venus, thank you for the question and a lot of the comments. I think that you're hitting a lot of the key issues and themes. Your basic question about the enhanced highway category, that really is for highway enhancements, primarily because we have the active transportation enhancements and system improvements really on the non-highway as far as a funding category side. Now, in that funding category, we can do things to help enhance active transportation modes, definitely for walking and biking networks and connectivity. Some things on transit, and these dollars are mostly federal highway dollars that we have available in state gas tax. So what we do on transit is somewhat limited, but there are transit funds as part of the STIP as well that we work very closely with our transit providers to program. So there are ways to help enhance modes of travel other than auto and truck for sure, but it's just categorized slightly differently. As far as your question around congestion and congestion relief, I can tell you that our Transportation Commission and their conversations, they recognize that congestion and congestion management and congestion relief is more than just building large highway projects, I think was the phrase you used. It's a combination of things. We need to do things to manage demand, manage the system, make it as efficient as possible. So that's how can we use travel options and choices, demand management techniques, as well as tolling and other pricing
Caller
mechanisms.
14, could you please mute your phone? Go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. Tolling and other congestion management techniques to help manage that congestion. But I think there's also a recognition, Mayor Venice, that there are still system deficiencies and bottlenecks where some level of investment in the highway is also probably part of that solution. Not the only solution, but it's going to be a number of things having to work together to really make that, to help solve and make congestion more manageable. But I can tell you with pretty much certainty that our commission recognizes this is way more than just large highway projects only. They recognize the need for the system to work together in a multimodal way. Did that help answer your question?
Yes, that does help. And I just have one, thank you. And I realize there's a survey, and so we'll get a chance to weigh in on all of these things. The other question I have is around, there's federal legislation that's gone through the House, the Moving Forward package. Our Congressman DeFazio is the chair of the Transportation Committee, and that also includes broader investments. In your projections, assume that's not going to pass, I guess. You don't have an alternate projection that says, well, if Moving Forward actually passes at the federal level, there might be more funding for some of these, both, that's got port, for ports as well as transit as well as alternative transportation.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, at this point, we're really going off of the current federal legislation. There's a lot of different speculation. I just got an update from our federal affairs person. Obviously, the House of Representatives is taking their August leave, so nothing's going to really move forward with any of those packages here for the next month at a minimum. And then as we get closer to the election, it's going to be interesting to see if they move anything prior to the election or after. So we at ODOT, we take more of a conservative approach in helping to build the funding levels. And if that changes during the process, the commission will be able to react to it. But we have not factored in any of those additional proposed measures or funding packages from Congress.
Okay, is there anyone, Carl? And Carl, are you, could you pronounce your last name for me? I'm sorry,
you had it right
before.
Commissioner Smarts is Carl Ye.
Okay, Mr. Ye, please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Mayor Venice and I were actually on the same wavelength, so I was going to ask a similar question, but just kind of summarize a little bit. It sounds like there's a lot of funding pressure on trying to maintain our current system, and kind of just further exploring some other ideas. I mean, what opportunities are there to try to find ways to channel this funding to not just alternative, but just ways to figure out how we, like, for example, intertransit type agreements and projects, so that we can try to get outside of some of the or relieve the pressure off some of our highway system?
Really good question. Obviously looking for partnerships and things that we can do to leverage other dollars and other investments. I think those are all concepts and ideas we should be working together on. Again, how much can be done as part of the different funding colors of money that we have available for the STIP. I think those are some of the challenges, especially when we talk about transit and leveraging those transit dollars. But I do think that's part of the conversation. And then back to your basic question of, there is a lot of pressure for, preserving our existing assets in our system. That's a, $1 trillion or whatever the number is, level of investment that we have from in our transportation network and system. And that's not just roads and bridges. It's all of those other assets, including, walking and sidewalks and bike lanes and other facilities that we've invested in over a number of years. So preserving and maintaining those, there is an awful lot of pressure to keep those functional. And I think that's part of what this question is how does the commission make some of those trade-off choices between maintaining those systems and understanding that. I think the challenge sometimes on the preservation is understanding that, when we're talking pavement condition, it's not just autos and trucks that often use that pavement. It's the transit vehicles that use that as well. It's also the bicyclists that use those facilities where we have shared facilities. So understanding that preservation is a multimodal aspect of the state, I think, is important. But the bottom line is there's not enough money to go around. So how do we make some headway in the other areas that are important to us while still maintaining a reasonable level of performance from our existing system? I think that's exactly these questions.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I want to ask Mr. Thompson, how are we doing on time?
Commissioner, we're actually about 5 minutes away from needing to start what we scheduled as the 45-minute final agenda item. So I think we should try and move on.
Okay. Any other quick comments from any of the MPC members that haven't spoken?
Pete, Joe Pishner here. I'd like to
go ahead, Joe.
Comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Thanks, sir. So I'm hoping that the OTC will give the MPC the time to get some more answers on this, and meet after the 6th of September because of our meeting schedule. Is that going to be possible?
Well, the OTC, I believe their meeting in September is around the 16th. I don't have that date right in front of me. I'd have to look that up. And we would need any kind of formal feedback if it was going to be presented to the commission in time for them to really take into account. We would need it by the first part of September. So we know the timeframes are really short. This is not going to be the only opportunity to kind of weigh in. This is to help weigh in around some of the first conversations around those funding scenarios. But the commission is not going to gavel down on this until the December meeting. So there's still additional time for additional conversations. It's what kind of information would you like to feed and give to the Transportation Commission for their discussions in September, which is really going to be how do we develop what these scenarios look like. The Transportation Commission meeting in August, I would also recommend would be a great resource for you to watch and listen to, because we're going to still frame that up for them a little bit, and that might help the policy board come up with the kind of information and answers to these questions that you would like to provide to the commission for that September discussion.
Well,
otherwise, there's not a whole lot I could do around the timeline because those dates are set.
So it's not really allowing the MPC to get together to figure out if we do have questions or we have concerns to be able to get those to the commission prior to their meeting. It's going to be after the fact.
No, we're going to meet on the 3rd of September, and so we have another meeting.
So we got like two days, or those 2 days for the staff to be able to put those questions together and get those to the OTC, and they're going to be able to consider those questions in that short time frame?
No, I'm just saying that the staff has between now and the MPC meeting to formulate a recommendation to MPC, and the MPC can approve it. And it can even be a letter or whatever Mr. Thompson thinks would be most effective. And that can be on the September 3 MPC, and we can debate it, and we can all have our 2 cents in it.
And then the OTC will have enough time to be able to bring that into their meeting as well to consider that.
Yeah, because he said early September.
So 3 days. Okay. Just want to make sure that we got good communications amongst us. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Thorson?
Yeah, go ahead.
In the chat, I see that Matt Rodriguez is asking to ask a question.
Okay, go ahead, Matt.
Thank you. I'll try and make it quick. Eric, thanks for the presentation. I just, given that we have traffic volume reductions through COVID, I was looking at the State Highway Trust Fund forecast that included kind of the volumes over a week through this event, and we're still in the negative traffic volume as everyone would expect. I'm wondering if ODOT is looking at the effects of that reduced traffic volume on some of the areas we've probably identified for congestion investments, and thinking about how we might forecast in the future whether or not those investments are as high of a priority if we start to see more of a move to telecommuting longer term. So some thoughts.
Really good question, and I think we're expecting a lot of those kinds of questions. Right now, we are seeing traffic reductions. Obviously, in the early days of COVID and phase 0, the governor's stay-home order, we're seeing pretty substantial reductions in traffic. We've seen steady increases starting to come back. It appears that we're starting to level off with the current situation. Last report I think I saw is we're somewhere between 10 to 12% is where we're averaging on weekday statewide traffic volume reductions, and around 15-16% on weekends across the state. Obviously, some routes are actually back to their levels they were in 2019, and other routes are down. As far as your question about this being more of a permanent situation, that's really hard to predict when you have a lot of other factors. There's still sectors of our economy that are not back to full employment. Obviously, if there's going to be teleworking, I think that'll have some of that impact. But I think some of our early projections, even around the telecommuting, is it probably won't be to the level of reduction that we're seeing right now, just because of how trips are really made. But it will probably have an impact in the long term, how growth occurs. So I think we're still going to have some of those congestion kind of areas. We're still going to have to kind of look at them, and it's still going to take a number of years to make those investments. And with hopefully COVID by that point in time will be a thing of the past. I think we all hope that, so we can get back to what we all consider a different situation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wants to make a comment that has not spoken? Okay. Okay, Mr. Thompson, I think we've concluded that agenda item, and now we're ready to look at our next agenda item, which is our item 6D. That's Travel Barrier Survey Process and Results Draft Report. Mr. Thompson is the staff contact, and if you could introduce our presenters, that would be great. And the requested action is that we listen to the presentation and provide feedback. So welcome, Mr. Thompson.
Commissioner, I'm going to go very quick here because we are running a little long. We have a presentation on the travel barrier survey process and the initial results. The survey is being conducted, or was conducted, as part of the update of our regional transportation plan. We have online with us 2 of our consultants who have been conducting and compiling the results of that survey. And I also sent out that PowerPoint and a 2-page summary to all of you just before the meeting started. So I've already turned over the presentation capabilities to our presenters, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves if they would.
Hi there, my name is Tony Ocarina with DHM, and I've got my colleague here, John Horvick, as well.
Hello, everybody. This is John Horvick here with Eugene as well. I'm the political director.
I noticed that John's voice is a bit muffled. Since I'll be doing most of the presenting today, can I get perhaps Paul, can you let me know if you can hear me clearly?
Tony, I can hear you just fine, and I did make you the presenter, so you should be able to share your screen.
Paul, like the previous presenter, for some reason, I'm not enjoying that privilege right now, and I'm hoping that you might be able to do what you did for our previous presenter.
Give me a moment here. I'm sorry about that. It shows that I made you a presenter, so I'm not sure why it's not working on your end, but I am bringing it up here shortly.
Apologies to everybody for the delay.
These things happen.
It is opening as I speak, and as soon as it's open, I will share my screen once again. Okay, trying to get PowerPoint to let me start the slideshow. Where is that? There it is. Okay, I have the slideshow up, and I am sharing the screen. And can people now see the slideshow?
I can certainly see it.
I can too.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, well, we'll get started. Again, my name is Tony Ocarino. I'm with DHM Research, and I'm here with my colleague, John Horvick, and want to thank you for the opportunity to present our findings here about travel behavior and barriers. And we're eager to share our results. The next slide. Purpose of the research really is to get a better sense of how the public perceives the transportation system, identify the most common travel behaviors, consider a number of the factors that influence or motivate residents to use alternatives, and finally to benchmark these findings to an original baseline survey that we conducted, DHM conducted back in 2014. So you can get a sense of some of the changing perceptions, behaviors, and motivations over the last 5 or 6 years. Next slide. We managed to get responses from 502 residents of the Central Lane TMA, employed a mix of traditional phone surveys along with text to online surveys where people got a text to their smartphone with a link that allowed them to take the survey online. And it was conducted in late June and early July. And we did our best to make sure we had a very representative sample. It's got a margin of error of plus or minus 4.4. And next slide. Just a few, before we jump into the results, just a few observations, which are that the 2014 survey we conducted was only with residents of the city of Eugene and the city of Springfield, whereas this time around we included a broader sample to include the entire Central Lane TMA. What that means is that we can make valid comparisons between 2014 and 2020 when we're looking at Eugene and Springfield, but not to the remainder of the area outside of Eugene and Springfield. We just didn't collect that data back in 2014. We also have some additional questions in the 2020 survey that we conducted around bus ridership, multimodal transport, and telecommuting that were not on that previous survey. We also realized that we conducted this in the middle of COVID-19 and the stay-at-home orders. And so we framed as often as possible the questions in such a way to have respondents really to think back at that period prior to the stay-at-home orders, so we could get a better sense of their more general travel behaviors. Okay, next slide. Top transportation priorities. Next slide. We began the survey with an open-ended question, which was, thinking about specifically about transportation in the area. What are the most important things, transportation issues you want your leaders to address? As you can see, expanding bus transportation is by far the biggest issue, followed by reducing traffic congestion and improving road conditions. Next slide. Back in 2014, we asked the same question, and those top 3 issues back in 2014 are the same top 3 issues in 2020 as well. But what we've noticed is expanding bus transportation and reducing traffic congestion have increased as priorities compared to 2014. Okay, next slide. Doing a comparison of Eugene and Springfield in 2020, you can see that, again, those top 3 priorities are shared by residents of both cities. They just happen to rank those priorities slightly differently. Expanding bus transportation, top priority in Eugene. Improving road conditions, top priority in Springfield. Next slide. Okay, this next section is a new section. We didn't ask the following questions back in 2014, but we included them at the request of some of the transportation partners that we worked with when developing the survey. Next slide. Okay, we asked the question, how frequently are you commuting to work or school between urban and rural areas in Lane County? Now, some caveats here. When we talk about urban and rural areas, these are not necessarily officially designated urban and rural areas. This is just what residents are self-reporting, self-described urban and rural areas. As you can see, almost half of residents say they're traveling to work or school between urban and rural areas at least several times a week. Next slide. We also asked, would you prefer to live closer to your workplace if you were able to find an affordable place to live, assuming you could find an affordable place to live? And about a third of residents say yes. Now, you can draw your own conclusions from this, but I think these findings clearly point to that bigger issue of the importance of transportation and land use planning working hand in hand. There are no real statistical differences between Eugene and Springfield residents also when it comes to this question.
Quick question, Tony.
Yeah, sure.
So, so this is a July survey, is that correct?
Late June, early July.
So this is during COVID where many folks are already working from home.
Yes, yes,
So
it
this could
is.
be really skewed.
Yeah,
I
and
don't know.
it's a tricky question given that
I'm not even sure if it would be valid, would it?
well, because working from home, working close to where you live could essentially mean in your house, given that so many people are working remotely. Nevertheless, it's an interesting data point, and I think you'll find towards the end of the survey, we have a number of interesting questions about telecommuting, which I think may give us a richer sense of what people's attitudes are about this issue. Okay, next slide. When it comes to wanting to live closer to work, we see some interesting demographic differences. That preference is definitely stronger among younger residents, among those in households earning between 50 and 100K, and those with children in the household. Okay, next slide. Now let's get back to those questions about travel behavior we asked in 2014, and we asked again here in 2020. The next slide. As you can see, the top 3 most frequently used modes of transportation are, number 1, driving alone in your personal vehicle, followed by driving in your personal vehicle with other household members, and thirdly, walking for non-recreational purposes. These are, this is the percentage of residents who are traveling by this mode weekly or more often. Okay. All right, next slide. Now looking at Eugene specifically, travel behavior is very similar to what it was in 2014. If you look at those second and third sets of bars, you'll see that there has been actually a slight decrease in driving alone or driving in your personal vehicle with other household members and walking for non-recreational purposes. It's hard to tell from the data what might be driving that, but it is something for you to consider. Next slide. When we look at Springfield specifically, we see the identical pattern. Again, driving alone, your personal vehicle is the top most frequent form of transportation, and slight decreases in those 2 other areas that we talked about. Okay, next slide. When we ask people why they drive alone, the 2 biggest reasons really come down to freedom and need. I want to come and go as I please, and I need a car for work or for daycare or errands. Next slide. By contrast, when it comes to why people choose alternatives to driving alone, the factors or motives that exert the greatest influence are those top 2. Information about health or environmental benefits, and difficulty parking. Interestingly, back in 2014, higher gas prices came in as the #1 reason people are choosing alternatives to driving alone, followed by information about health and environmental benefits and difficulty parking. So we have seen a higher gas prices drop significantly as a reason for as a reason not to drive alone. Okay, now let's take a look more specifically at what residents are telling us about their biking behavior. The next slide. We asked residents who bike at least monthly or more often why they bike for transportation. Enjoyment and health are the top two reasons, as you can see from these blue bars, followed by environmental and financial considerations. Next slide. For those using their bike as their main form of transportation, about 1 in 5 are also riding it to and from public transportation.
So if I could ask a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
On your previous slide, I noticed the last item was I don't have access to a car. Was there an option like they didn't even have access to other forms of transportation, like walking or taking the bus or something like that?
There were, but those were all, less than 5%. So
okay.
They kind of got put into another category.
Gotcha. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure. Okay, we can jump ahead. So now among those who bike monthly or less often, half actually say that they would like to bike more frequently. Now that's a really promising sign, suggesting that there's considerable potential growth in biking as an alternative. Some interesting demographic differences there. That desire is definitely stronger among residents age 18 to 34. That yes column would go up to 58%. And in the age category of 35 to 54, that yes column would go up to 51%. It's down to 32% for those above age 55. Okay, next slide. Looking more specifically at Eugene, that same question, we see that the desire to bike more often has remained fairly steady over the last 6 years. By contrast, on the next slide, in Springfield, the desire to bike more often has grown since 2014. Interestingly, that strong preference or that strong desire has actually declined a bit, but that somewhat category of those who would desire to bike more often has increased quite dramatically. Next slide. When it comes to where people are biking, at least for non-recreational purposes, shopping is by far the #1 reason, followed at a distant second by visiting friends. Next slide. There's a lot of reasons. Residents tell us that they would choose to bike more often. The big ones really are the top 4 on the top 4 bars on this particular chart. Quality bike parking at destinations, bike lanes or paths available or better connected, safety on the roads, and stores and services closer to where residents live. Sorry, next slide. Now, all those questions we asked about biking, we also asked about walking as an alternative. And here's what we found. As was the case with biking, enjoyment and health are the primary reasons. Residents walk as a form of transportation. Interestingly, some interesting demographic differences. Residents above age 55, 69% are more likely to walk for health. And students, 40%, adult students, are more likely to walk to save money. So there are some interesting demographic differences here, but those two top reasons definitely pop. The next slide. And here's where they go when they go out walking for non-recreational purposes. Again, as with biking, shopping comes out as the most common reason or destination, followed by eating out. Now, if you'll recall, for biking, the number 2 reason was visiting friends. Here, the number 2 reason is eating out. Next slide. Now, as with those who bike infrequently, monthly or less often, about half would actually like to walk more frequently. So again, big potential growth area here. Next slide. When we asked residents what the biggest motivators might be when it comes to what would entice them to walk more, by far, the number 1 reason is stores and services closer to where they live, followed by 2 other pretty big reasons. You see those 2 second bars, sidewalks in the area that are connected and feeling safer walking along and crossing the street. No real statistical differences, significant differences between Eugene and Springfield, by the way, here. Okay, next slide. Now, this whole section on bus ridership, which is the last transportation alternative section that we examine in detail, is entirely new. These questions were not asked back in 2014, so we lack the ability to do a comparative analysis here. Top reasons people ride the bus really are not having access to a car, desire to save money, and enjoyment. Some interesting demographic differences here that we found kind of surprising, but are interesting. Women, 35% more likely than men, 13% to cite enjoyment as a reason for riding the bus. Okay, now when comparing Eugene, next slide. Comparing Eugene and Springfield when it comes to top reasons for riding the bus. As you can see, for Eugene, it's not having access to a car, whereas for Springfield, it's the desire to save money. So different motivators for residents in different cities. Next slide. Again, as to places people go where they when they ride the bus. Again, shopping is the number 1 reason, with entertainment as a distant second. Interestingly, work down at 17%, perhaps a bit surprising. We might have anticipated that more people are riding the bus to go to work. But again, this is a fairly small sample size. As you can see, there's only 38 residents in this particular sample. These are people, it's in part because we only ask this question of people who use the bus as their number 1 means of transportation. And that's just simply a smaller group out of a sample of 500. Again, shopping and entertainment are the primary destinations. Next slide. And here again, for those who ride the bus monthly or less often, and this is a much bigger sample of 440 residents, about a third say they would like to ride the bus more frequently. Again, here, no real statistically significant differences between Eugene and Springfield. Next slide. What might motivate residents to ride the bus more often? There are many factors, as you can see here, but the two biggest ones are good connections to and from transit stops and buses coming more frequently. You know, that pay particular attention when you're looking at this slide to those dark green bars. Those are people who strongly agree with the view that they would ride the bus more if there were good connections or their buses came more frequently. So dark green means stronger preference. Okay, next slide. There were no, I should say, about those previous factors for why people might ride the bus more frequently. We didn't really find many significant differences by area when we asked people that question, except when it came to this particular question. We asked here if they would be more willing to ride the bus if a county-wide bus service for longer commutes and travel existed. And excuse the typo here. And we see a significantly stronger preference among Eugene than Springfield residents. Okay, now let's move on to multimodal transportation. These questions also are new. We did not ask them in 2014. Basically asked some questions about multimodal transportation options that might be of interest to residents of the region. We tried to gauge interest in 3 types of programs. And as you can see, about half were interested in all of these programs. Programs to make electric vehicles more convenient to use, bike share programs, or programs to allow you to use electric assist bikes, and programs to encourage the use of electric scooters. Clearly stronger preference for those top 2 than the bottom one. Nevertheless, close to half of residents seem to be interested in all of those programs. Next slide. And finally, coming to the sort of the end of our portion of the presentation, and then eager to hear if anyone has questions. But we also asked a new set of questions related to telecommuting, especially given the dramatic changes we've seen recently due to COVID and the stay-at-home orders. So here's what we found. Almost half of residents believe that telecommuting will become more common in the future, with some differences among Eugene, Springfield residents and residents in the TMA, but outside of those 2 cities. Next slide. That belief that telecommuting really is the future, or likely in the future, more likely in the future, is stronger among adult students, among those under age 55, and also among those with children in the household. Next slide. We asked people, would you prefer to telecommute to work or school in the future, even at least some of the time, if you had an option? As you can see, about half would prefer to telecommute if they had that option. No real statistically significant differences by area here. Next slide. That preference to telecommute to work or school is stronger among certain demographic groups, again, among adult students and also among those under age 55. Next slide. For the roughly half of those who would prefer to telecommute, again, the sample size is about 240 here, as you can see from that bottom right corner on the slide. About 8 in 10 would prefer to telecommute at least several days a week, if not more. And that's the last bit of data to share with you. The next slide, which is the final slide, just points out that we are working on finalizing the report, and we should have the final report for you sometime next week, certainly by the end of next week.
Good.
Okay.
Well, thank you. And if I could get anyone that wants to be recognized to identify themselves, either, oh, there's Mr. Ye. Very good. Why don't you go ahead, and then if other people could, whose cameras I can see, can wave their hands or notify Mr. Thompson. Go ahead, Carl.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just want to say thank you very much for the presentation. And I did have a question about what one of your first slides, which was about the top priority transportation desires or needs from the community, which one of them was expanding bus transportation. And I think one of your slides did address this, but it sounded like expansion meant two things. One, something that was in terms of coverage, the buses went out farther than they were currently, and also frequency. So was that the definition you were working off in terms of expanding bus transportation?
I'm going to look at the these were first, I should say, these are open-ended questions. So in order to code them, we just used a kind of catch-all, which is expand bus transportation. So we didn't ask a precise question. We just got sort of general open-ended responses about, yeah, we need more buses. We wish there were more buses. We wish they came more frequently. We wish they covered a larger area. Those were all sort of combined into one expand bus transportation category.
I see. So it could mean a lot of those things, but I think you did have a slide where there were some people who weighed in specifically that they wanted something more countywide and also more frequency.
That's true. And at some point later in the survey, we asked a specific question about, whether you'd be interested in a county-wide bus system that would assist with longer commutes.
And if I could sneak in one more question,
Sure.
There was one of the questions I think, or survey questions you had asked, was about the preference to be closer to work. And I was wondering how that was phrased exactly, because if you asked me, even pre-COVID or during COVID, if I would rather be closer to work, I'd probably say yes. But I was wondering if there were any questions about like if they would rather be closer to like daycare or health services or restaurants and other amenities. And it was just perhaps the way this question was asked that influenced the answer.
That's quite possible. We did not ask the question multiple ways. We simply asked the question, would you live closer to your workplace if you were able to find an affordable place to live?
I see. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Okay, anyone else?
I should say I have my colleague John here John, you're welcome to chime in at any point.
Any other MPC members that want to ask a question? Okay, then, Mr. Thompson, I think we are concluded that portion of the agenda. Is that your understanding? I'd like to thank our guests, if that is true.
It is true, Commissioner, and again, yes, thank you very much to our guests. We did, as you all know, have to put together this agenda and this meeting, indeed, which we were originally planning to cancel altogether fairly rapidly. So they put together the presentation very quickly for us ahead of having the final report, which, as they said, will be available next week. We will be sharing the full report with you, and staff will be using the survey information to help us in the discussions around the regional transportation plan update and goals and objectives in that long-range plan.
Okay, and Carl, did you want to add one more thing?
Oh, thank you I just want to make just a quick comment about that. What I got out of this presentation was that it seems like appealing to people's desire for health. It seems to be possibly a good strategy to use for increasing non-car transportation. And I also want to say that, COVID actually was helpful in one way, which is I think people normally I've always wanted to telecommute, but I think employers were part of that problem in the sense not wanting to allow that. But I think that attitude has softened, in my opinion. So I just want to note that. But thank you again for this presentation. I think it was very informative.
Okay, and we'd like to especially thank both presenters that did this work, and really look forward to the written report. So thank you. And we'd like to now move to item 6E on our agenda, which is our follow-up and next steps on our ODOT update.
Franny, if you're still with us, do you have any ODOT update items?
Yeah, I just have a quick one. We have, with the COVID, have gotten direction from our leadership that we are extending the telecommute to the end of October. And our understanding from leadership is also that it could continue beyond that as well, with that being more and more of the status quo for people. Productivity has been good. People seem to like it. And so leadership is really looking at that and liking that way of doing business. So I think that's important for the discussion. And then the other thing is I've got some construction projects underway. The I-105 project that's been kind of a traffic snarl for a while. Actually, it's moving okay, I think. But we should be wrapping up with that project on the road by the beginning to middle of September, which will be good news. And we have the big work going on at the Delta Beltline that will proceed through this construction season and into next. But at the end of all that, we expect the operations on the Delta Beltline interchange to be much smoother for everyone. Although it's not an enhancement as far as giving us more capacity on the road, it will make it more operational and safer. Thanks.
Okay, and the next agenda item, I think, Mr. Thompson, are you handling that one? MTIP administrative amendments?
Yes, and as always, there is a list of the administrative amendments that Transportation Planning Committee approved for your information in the packet, and they're there, again, for your information. If there's any questions, please let us know.
Okay, and then in terms of the next steps, I know it's our next meeting, September 3. Any other next steps, Mr. Thompson?
No, September 3rd is indeed the next meeting. Obviously, at this time, it'll be a virtual meeting again. We keep sort of, I guess, optimistically listing the physical locations, but I'm pretty sure it'll be virtual again. We do have on the planned agenda a discussion on the staff response to recent public comments on greenhouse gas emissions and the MPO planning work. Following up on today's agenda item, we will continue the discussion around the ODOT STIP funding allocations and perhaps some recommendations on comments from this body as to where the money should be prioritized. And that's about it.
Okay, anything else from MPC members? Okay, seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.